The war in Ukraine is starting to look like the war against COVID. Slava Ukraini, the corny catch cry of politicians and celebrities alike as they jetted off to Kyiv for a photo op with President Volodymyr Zelensky, has about as much cut-through with the punters these days as its sloganistic predecessor, safe and effective. Either as a result of boredom or in anticipation of Donald Trump negotiating a peace deal, the Ukrainian flags that once replaced jab emojis in sanctimonious social media profiles are themselves now being quietly taken down. But dumping COVID into the rubbish bin of history was relatively easy. People were grateful to be given their lives back. Natural immunity ran its course, as it was always going to do, and if I'm not mistaken, most people were so embarrassed about being fooled by the whole scam that they were happy for their political representatives to give it a cursory inquiry and move on. Ukraine, however, might not be quite so easy to forget, if only because the man most likely to end it won't let the perps get off so lightly. Unlike the victims of the lockdowns and jabs, who were mostly powerless to prosecute Big Pharma and Big Government for their injuries, the President has both the power and the motivation to ask the people who promoted this war, what the hell were you thinking? Ukraine was already the most corrupt nation in Europe. There was an opportunity to end the war in 2022, which Boris Johnson scuppered. Ukraine press-ganged men off the street and off towards the firing line, banned the Orthodox Church and refused to hold elections. Meanwhile, the most exclusive ski resorts in Europe were being booked out by the Ukrainian elite, charging their après-ski cognacs up to waitresses and factory workers in Idaho whose taxes had been redirected to fund the war effort in a place they couldn't have found on a map 3 years earlier. Worst of all, more than 1 million people have been killed or injured in the war. European leaders can spout platitudes about the grim toll of defending freedom, but Trump and his team can reply with the obvious. Ukraine does not represent freedom, and the whole shit show could have reached a ceasefire years ago anyway. Neither can NATO allied warmongers plead ignorance about the war. One only needed to see the video of Ben Stiller in June 2022 taking a break from his Hollywood day job, playing a hapless loser, to jet into Ukraine to meet his, quote, hero, fellow portrayer of hapless losers turned bagman for an unwinnable war, Zelensky, to suspect that plausibility and authenticity was somewhat lower priorities than money laundering to the shadowy figures choreographing the charade. Stiller has vehemently denied that he trousered a lazy US $4 million from US aid for the trip, which is neither here nor there. What he can't deny is that he lent his celebrity status to a project that kills ordinary people, while billions of dollars of other people's hard-earned money disappeared faster than Jewish patients at Bankstown Hospital. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is in the same boat. He'd barely got his feet under the prime ministerial desk before he made the pilgrimage to Kyiv to meet Zelensky and pledge hundreds of millions of dollars worth of material and financial support in the fight for freedom, and promising to remain an ally for, quote, as long as it takes. Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong imposed sanctions against Russia, saying without even a hint of irony that they were targeting people, quote, spreading mistruths to justify this war. Well, how this didn't result in a blanket ban of Stiller's back catalogue is anyone's guess. When Trump's agenda to reassess the United States' alliances finally comes around to Australia, Anthony Albanese, or Peter Dutton if he wins the forthcoming election, will have a hard time explaining what they were doing at the front of this photo of all our federal representatives assembled in the House of Reps to grimly offer their support to Zelensky and his money laundering partners. Take a look at Albanese's drooping shoulders and ask yourself if anybody in Ukraine felt even slightly emboldened by the milquetoast militarism of this spineless apparatchik. One of the unsayable truths about the war in Ukraine is that Russian President Vladimir Putin is a monster by our standards, but not by Russia's. Russians are strangely sanguine about their kings, tsars and presidents constantly looking for wars to fight and other people to oppress. Russians themselves exude an occasionally amusing humourlessness and weakness for vodka, but that masks a darkness within. For an insight into what Russians are really capable of, search for the podcast The Anti-Humans by amateur historian Darryl Cooper, describing the Red Army's occupation of Poland after World War II, and remind yourself just how lucky we are that it's only Putin we're up against. If Western leaders see any advantage in that, it is that they can talk tougher to Putin than they ever would have to Stalin. Even now, as Trump is orchestrating an end to hostilities, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is astonishingly promising British troops to Ukraine. If Trump is dissatisfied with the excuses Australia's Prime Minister comes up with for backing the absurd war in Ukraine, he will not be as dissatisfied as ordinary Australians feel. We've blown more than $1 billion on Zelensky. Meanwhile, China is preparing for war in our region, and anonymous militant foreign Islamists are possibly already manipulating hostile events on our soil. Should either of those adversaries pull the trigger, Australia will be almost defenceless. Would Ukraine return the gesture of unconditional support for as long as it takes? Call me cynical, but I think probably not.